Hello, I'm going to give you some feedback on your assignment 2 on a comprehensive approach. The way this works is I'm going to talk to you about your text on what we call the global level and also a little bit on what's called the local level. The global level of a text is to do with the sort of overall structure, how you write paragraphs, transitions in between paragraphs, and how your text sort of hangs together in broad terms. Is there a message? Can I understand it readily? And are you aware of your reader as you structure your text? The local level has to do with grammar errors, maybe, or vocabulary, things like that are on a more sort of detailed level. So those are the things that I'm going to be looking at. Have a look through your text as you're listening to this. Pause the video if you need to, etc., so that you know what I'm talking about. I'm going to be looking at your text and on my notes as we go along. If we start with the overall structure of your text, the first thing that I noticed is that there's no introduction. This is common for most of you, and indeed this was the case for the last course that we did in the fall, that you don't have an introduction. For you to consider your reader, you need to introduce your topic. This reads very much like an assignment that's directed at a specific teacher, and that makes the whole thing a bit confusing. So introduce your topic as if you are writing to someone who has some but not a complete sort of overview of this topic in general, because it just starts in the middle of everything. So an introduction, and then towards the end you round off your text. You sort of, what have I written? What is my main conclusion, etc. When you do that, the text appears more whole and you seem to be more in control of your text. So that's the first thing I would say. Introduce the text, introduce the topic. And as you go along and you write your paragraphs, make sure that they have one clear message. And then when you introduce or when you progress into the next paragraph, make sure that the reader understands what the logic behind this is. Why is he progressing the way that he is? It needs to be obvious to me. It's referred to as signposting. So you imagine your text, the introduction is sort of, this is where we're going to go from A to B, and then you signpost along the way to make sure that the reader is aware of how far in the progression are we in the text, how far am I from the conclusion. That makes it a much more, it makes it easier for the reader to understand, but it also makes you seem in control and very sort of like a conscious writer rather than someone just doing an assignment. And why am I bothering with that? Because this is an assignment and you are meant to do this, but you're also meant to be writing professional English. Remember that in your task description there was a quote from Stanex 6001 that Mike talked about when we were in Brussels. It refers to professional English, and being a professional writer in this case means that you have your reader in mind when you write. So firstly, introduce the text and consider your paragraphs. One clear message per paragraph. Sometimes that message is expressed in what's called a topic sentence. It's like one sentence that in a nutshell describes this is what it's about. It may be your claim or your argument in that paragraph, and then what is sort of the rest of that paragraph outside of the topic sentence is the support that you need in order to convince the reader, or maybe just a further description to elaborate on a fact that you've stated. And when you then write these paragraphs, make sure that the transitions are there in between the paragraphs, and that those transitions lead you naturally towards the end of your text, where you then round off and say, so this is what I can conclude, or it might be that there's no clear conclusion. And what you do then is then you describe the main tenets of your argument in a very short way towards the end. In terms of going a little bit more into detail about your writing, you write in kind of bullet form or list form. That makes the text seem a bit fragmented. We want prose, not lists, because it makes the overall impression of the text Again, like an assignment you have to solve rather than you communicating with your reader about the most important things to do with comprehensive approach. Remember that in professional and academic writing, we're also looking for how you've chosen or what you've chosen to include, and then as a consequence, what you've chosen not to include. So when you just do lists, we don't get a very clear sense of that. It's like, okay, I'm just going to put everything in here. What you can do is basically write a paragraph that then lists all the things that you need to. That's prose, but not a list form in terms of the layout. And then you can basically write first of all, secondly, thirdly, and then finally. That's another way of doing a list. That's just in prose form rather than the layout of having these bullets. That makes you seem more convincing as a writer. So those are things that I would like you to consider on the global level. In terms of the local level, I see a lot of things that are working in your text in terms of your language. You're able to express what you want to express. Every now and again, there's some turns of phrases and some choice of words that are not quite idiomatic. That means that's not what an English-speaking writer would write. But this is not something that's systematic, so it comes up every now and again. So what you can do with that, basically how you can practice that, is to read a lot of English. That's by far the easiest way. To become better is to imitate. But keep in mind that sometimes your full stops, you need to work on that. Also, recognizing whether you need to use an adverb or an adjective. That's something I would encourage you to look into as well. For instance, is it systematical or systematically? You can very easily find good resources if you Google adverb or adjective. You find both tasks that you can do to train this, but also the kind of the explanation of theory, the grammatical theory behind this. A little bit of issues with subject-verb agreement, but in Danish is called congruence. You might also want to look into that as well. But in overall, I would say that your language functions very well. You can express what you want to, but there are minor details that you can brush up on. So have a read through of your text, keeping these things in mind, and see if you can pinpoint what I'm talking about. You feel free to drop me an email if there's anything that doesn't make any sense. And the fire alarm just went off here. I'm at the Royal Academy, so I hope this wasn't too disturbing for you. I'm going to go and see if there's an actual fire or just one of those false alarms that we have all the time.